To introduce Cameron, in 1968, Cameron Algie was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short, with a prognosis leading to inevitable vision loss. Whilst working as a CEO for an industry body, Cameron worked with his wife to establish a society for RP research. In recognition of this and his commercial work, he was made a member in the Order of Australia in 1993. Recognizing his long battle with failing sight, Cameron worked for 15 years with Vision Australia, where his life experiences and those of his clients now form the basis of his book titled, I Can See Clearly Now. Without further ado, Cameron, if you would like to take the floor.
Thanks very much, Hamby. Thanks very much indeed. Hope everybody can hear me, and thank you, Hamby, for the introduction, and also to Niv and the foundation itself for giving me this opportunity to come onto your webinar. It's a great pleasure to be here. And as has been briefly introduced, yes, I've got vision loss. I've had it for 50 odd years. And strangely enough, my particular type of RP is very similar to macular degeneration, where the central vision normally goes first. And that's where I've been for 50 years, unable to read ordinary print. I did most of my studies at university by people reading books onto tape and working with tapes. And when most of my office work for years was done in a similar way, where all things had to be read to me, and I'd dictate out the answers for my secretaries to type up, and so on. And that continued right through till about 1996, when technology started to come into play, and there's a system which you might have heard of called JAWS, Job Access with Speech, came into play, and I was able to then scan in documents, and the computer with its software would read the documents to me, and suddenly my world started changing. And that was my main basis of operation. But for that, I probably would have had to have given up the type of work I was doing. I was at that stage doing legal work, and it's very paper intensive. And so that kept me going right through for many years. And then in the last, what is it now, 5, 6, 7, getting on towards 10 years, a bit longer, other technology came into play with the smartphones and with applications for the phones that go on, some of them which are free. And the phone started not just with Siri on the iPhones, but it had voiceover. The phones were able to talk. And so suddenly I was in a world where I could function in a way which I thought was more normal and perhaps more efficient than I'd ever been able to do so before. And that's where I was when I started at Vision Australia in 2006, really playing a role what's called facilitator, and running what is called peer support groups for people with vision loss who were coming to Vision Australia. And these peer support groups were done either face-to-face or by phone, telephone. And we encouraged people to start talking about how they were feeling, what their experiences were, and how they were feeling with vision loss. And for many, it was the first time they were able to talk about it. And maybe that's what some of you are thinking today as you're listening in. It's the whole basis of my role was that I came into the groups with a vision loss experience and a work experience, and then talking with people about how they felt, and then looking at many of the solutions which are possible to be able to cope and manage vision loss. I did that role for 14 years, retired in 2019. But what came out of those groups very clearly, two broad points. People coming into the groups are saying, nobody tells me anything. I don't know where to go. Where do you get all the supports from? Nobody tells us. My doctor hasn't helped me. I can't cope. I've got to give, many people saying, well, I've got to give up work, I've got to go into a home, aged care home, and so on. And many people then, once they started talking, expressing the common experiences of vision loss, frustration being one of the most common, fear and grief, grief over their loss and the fact that they couldn't read, they couldn't drive, they couldn't see their children, grandchildren, and so on. And for, of course, facing what is really traumatic shock about that sudden change. It may not have been sudden, either sudden or gradual change to their life. And the second major component that came out of these groups was they invariably said, oh, no one understands me. I talk to my family and they don't get it, or my husband doesn't get it, or people then come in and they take over. I can't explain my vision loss because it varies during the day. It's all in the morning and bad at night, or etc. How can I explain vision loss when it's foggy and so on? Other people then, in responding to other people, they either take over with a good intention to make life easier. Oh, look, an assumption made by sighted people that, oh, because they're losing their vision, they're blind, therefore they're helpless and hopeless. Big mistake. And other thing that family members in particular couldn't cope with it. Young people, children, couldn't cope with their parent having vision loss and not using a cane. Parents often, and this certainly happened, arguing between themselves whose fault it was that the gene caused the vision loss, and in some ways also running away from the fact that they were scared themselves of vision loss and what it meant for them. So the two broad streams of response that I got from these groups, and other facilitators got the same. What I found in the course of these groups, there was no central reference point, no general resource I could refer people to say, look, here it is, this is all explained. And that's what led me, when I retired in 2019, to write the book that's just been referred to. I can see clearly now understanding and managing vision loss, because while there are many autobiographies, all excellent, all good, many single papers on particular issues explaining types of vision loss or certain how to do things, there is no central reference guide. And that's what I've done. I've pulled it all together really to service those two broad points. One, for the people who might be experiencing vision loss, particularly in the early days of sight loss where they're not sure what's happening, all the fears and confusions coming. And also for the one that's just obvious, a book that you can say, look, to your family, look, here it is, this explains it all, so you don't have to do it. You can give it to your parents. And I found that with my own brother and sister who, while supportive, never fully understood what I need, how I functioned or what I needed. And the change has been quite dramatic and immediate when they've read the book and helped criticise it, I suppose. So this book, to explain it a bit further, it's structured really along the lines of what I'm just outlining. It's in three parts. The first part really dealing with the difficult psychological, emotional side of vision loss, what it means and how to understand vision loss, how to understand yourself. And I'll come back to that point further. The other part then dealing with things, the fear, grief and loss, the psychological aspects of vision loss, what it means in part one, and attitudes, dealing with attitudes to vision loss, all in that part one. Part two is much more broader. It talks about schooling, teenagers, men's issues, women's issues, parenting, and education, and so on. Part three, dealing with what's just simply practical tips, which I've drawn from all those years of the group's work. And you might find in reading many biographies, autobiographies, you'll find they've got a list of practical tips in them too. But what I've done here is really brought as much as I could learn in all these groups, pull them together in comprehensive lists of managing in your own independence and independence in the home, independence in the community, working, I call it working in the shed, technology. The latest list of technologies in there is still, fortunately, still relevant. And we can come back to deal with technology again as a separate point. And really all sort of how to do it things, little tips that I've got largely from other people. So the composition of the books come from all the groups that I ran. Strangely enough, I had to run groups for older people, younger people, mid-age people, men, teenagers, parents with children. So all the issues that are in the book have come out of those groups. And in that sense, it supports that point I've made, that it's a comprehensive reference book or guide on all the issues you might encounter. Coming back now to part one, the psychology of vision loss. Somebody said, in handing out copies to certain people, another organisation dealing with arthritis, when they read it, they said, oh, that's funny. Most of the issues about coping with anxiety and coping with trauma are similar to what we're experiencing. Of course, that's the case. Blindness and vision loss, while very traumatic and very hard to deal with, especially in early years, the psychological impact of trauma is similar for many things. So we're not alone in that regard. Trauma can be caused by, of course, great emergencies, death, fire, tragedy, disaster, and so on. But the impact of blindness is just as traumatic as any of those, because vision loss represents 85% of our sensory perception. It could be more if we were concentrating on something that needed visual work. It could be higher than that. But as a general rule, vision is our greatest sensory perception. Of course, we've got hearing, smell, and taste, and so on. But because that's so large, we can then start to say, well, that's why the impact, even though it might be just slow, gradual vision loss, the impact is so hard to cope with, because it affects everything. The obvious one, reading. Once we stop reading or find it difficult to read, we find that stressful. We find ourselves getting fatigued, probably headaches, and it can lead on. The stress of vision loss can lead into forms of illness and other sicknesses, just the sheer effort of coping with vision loss. But then also the trauma, which, as I said, trauma, the impact of trauma and the responses to trauma are similar for many other types of illness or tragedy, that we need to understand them, to start to say to ourselves, that's why I'm perhaps responding that way, why we might be, a common response to vision loss is embarrassment. I'm afraid to explain it to other people. I don't like asking other people for help. I don't want to use the right cane. What will other people think? So they're all about perceptions, about what we think of ourselves and what we think other people would think of us. And we find it very hard to deal with because we're not used to that. We don't want to do it. Well, essentially, we're all private people, and we don't like having to expose ourselves in that way. Now, that will vary very much between the individual, of course. Some people are far more open and personality-wise happy to chat about it, but nevertheless, the grief of vision loss can be kept very, very hidden and be long-lasting. And as many of the people in my peer group said, when I wake up in the morning, I can't see. It's there for every minute, every hour, all day, every day, ongoing and perpetual. And I'm sick of it and I'm fed up with it. And therefore, a common response to that is withdraw from the pain of vision loss, the pain of trauma. Now, that is so typical of all responses to trauma. But we need to be able to recognise it in ourselves and say, if that's what's happening, well, how can I now change? How can I do things? And how can I go on reading? How can I go on being active? Some parts of your life might be cut out. For example, driving is the most obvious one, which is deeply traumatic for us, depending on our age, and can be very isolating, and isolation is another big problem. So all these issues start to spring out of this inability to carry on as normal. And strange enough, and I can say this from my own life's experience, for many, many years, when I had partial sight and still working, I used to have all these silly excuses. You know, I'd say to people in the meeting, oh, I can't read this. I've left my reading glasses behind. Could you read it for me? Why? Because I didn't want to admit to having vision loss, and maybe in a business working environment, it wasn't entirely suitable to do that. So we start to funnel down into a whole series of consequential responses which make vision loss so important. While other disabilities are shocking and more disabling physically, the impact, because we're all expected to be sighted and all expected to whiz and whir around as per normal, and vision loss has got another component, because if you're in a wheelchair, or if you've got a broken arm, or you've got something more disabling, which is physical, people see it, other people will see it and can either avoid you or come and offer to help. For many, many years with vision loss, you can deny it and avoid it. I did that. And many of you listening may feel you've done the same thing. Again, it's a typical response. There's nothing bad about it in the sense of you being silly or not coping. It's only bad once you realise what's happening that you continue to do it and say to yourself, well, I'm going to avoid it. I can't. And many people said, oh, I'm too old to learn technology. I'm too old now. I can't be bothered, and shut themselves off from the pain of vision loss, the trauma that comes from vision loss. And there's another point, which is I'll touch on briefly before I swing back to more broader issues, is that often, almost invariably, clients coming into the groups will say, I've been to see a psychologist and they don't help. They can't help me. And they'd say that about doctors too. I can spend some time with typical doctors' responses. But one of the reasons why psychologists weren't helping was that the psychologists themselves, while trained to deal with responses to trauma, grief and loss, mostly don't get it about the fact that vision loss is this ongoing, daily, hourly, weekly problem we've got where our life has been restricted. They can't grasp that in a normal situation of tragedy, whether it's sudden vision loss or some accident, we deal with it, we cope with it, we go into perhaps operations in hospital, into rehabilitation, and rebuild our lives accordingly. But with vision loss, because it's hidden and we can hide it, it tends to then keep that feeling of loss and grief running with us. And there's now a change in thinking in psychology to start to recognise that you can have something happen in your life where you pick up and you're feeling good about yourself, and suddenly you go to do something the next week or the next month with your vision loss and you don't cope and you feel an idiot and you've made a mistake, and it could be from falling over or making a mistake in buying a product with the wrong ingredients in it. It could be as simple as that, or just the frustration of not being able to read things and having to ask people. That ongoing stress that causes is what needs to be understood in understanding vision loss. We will all have it in some way. And again, depending on our personality as to whether or not we will be badly affected or deeply affected by it, or we can just chuck it off and get on with it. I do know a lot of people, when they came into my groups, are saying, I want to find answers here. Bang, bang, bang. I'm all about finding solutions, and you could guide them very quickly to the solutions. But if solutions are not offered early in your vision loss experience, we go into what's called a disorder, an adjustment disorder. That's a medical term used, adjustment disorder, where because we don't know the answers, our life and our thinking becomes disordered because we're too busy trying to cope. to find excuses or techniques. The sooner you can get onto solutions, the better you'll be. And that's why there's particularly in the book, there's a chapter on technology, because if you can pick up with technology, and I'll explain a bit what before I explain what I used, your life can suddenly be restored to being more capable again. It won't be the same as what you were before. Therefore, you've got to accept that you're going to be different. You're going to have to do things differently, but it doesn't mean you can't do what you really want to do. And to give that, and I give this example in the book of many, many, many totally blind people who have become doctors, mountain climbers, professors, all sorts of, and you can't believe that people will become doctors, but there's a lady, Jane Paulson in Canada, she's dead now. She had diabetes, became blind when she's just finishing her medical studies and kept on practicing always. Now, you might say, how the hell can she do it? Well, it explains it in the book, but quite simply, where she needed help, for example, in visual diagnosis of a patient, she would call on a colleague to help her. But for the most part, she found she could diagnose patients without having to see them. And that's the way we have to think ourselves. We don't have to see things to do them. We can do it differently. And if you come to terms with that fundamental point, then you can start to say, okay, I'm different now, and I'll get on with it. Technology's fantastic. Don't say you're too old but to learn it, because I had people in the groups aged well into their 90s who would quite willingly take it up once it was explained to them. Buy an Apple iPhone, get computers and get the software for computers, and then get going again, writing their memoirs, writing their emails, writing and communicating again as per normal. So you see, that suddenly opened up the door for them to keep on doing what they wanted to do. Yes, you will find that there's some things that are difficult. Playing cards, card games that can remain difficult, but there are many large print cards and large print games that you can be using. Some of those are listed in the book, and you can find out about them by contacting organisations like Vision Australia and Guide Dogs. But understand that you can do it, but do it differently is the sort of the big turning point or tipping point which will get you going again. Now, again, that a book details all that. It discusses the psychological aspects of vision loss, why we try and hide it, denial and avoidance it's called, where we'll try and run away. And that's logical, because like it's quite extraordinary that we tend to think we're probably got lots of fears. You're fearful of losing your sight. It depends where you're coming from. It either death, cancer, and death and dying are larger, but vision loss is right up there in the top 5 of the greatest fears for mankind. And it's there because of what I was touching on before, the percentage of sensory perception. But it also leads to this creation of anxiety and fears. Now, it's quite surprising. When I first heard this, I didn't believe it, but I checked and checked it and checked it again. We're only born with 2 innate, inherent programmed fears. Only 2. One's fear of falling and the other's fear of noise. All the rest are learnt. And you think about it, fear of how we look, fear of being embarrassed, fear of getting your fingers burnt, fear of your safety, all these things are all learnt fears. And if they're learnt, they can be unlearnt. And if they've got to the point where you can't cope with it anymore, you can't, and again, it's not the discussion today to go through that anxieties in detail, but if you can't resolve it, then obviously you'd need medical support and medical help, but you can work through anxieties to eliminate them out of your life. And that's very relevant for vision loss, because I said most people coming in are suffering from the frustration, anxieties of vision loss. What will my family think? What will my work think? All these factors were starting to play on their minds. And of course, they become anxious. Now, I get anxious. I'm not immune from any of this. For most of my life, I lived in fear of what my employers would think or my work colleagues would think and so on. It's nothing to be ashamed of at all, but it's there. I'm still afraid going out at times. If I'm in an alien new situation, I'll be fearful. And fear can be good and bad, but fear is also a warning signal and tells us to be careful. So you've got to respect, if you're feeling that way, you've got to respect it. So in the book, again, when I talk about the section of being mobility in the community, lots of tips about how to approach going out are addressed. Now, it's all about skill development, knowledge and confidence. And one of the great things to come to terms with, of course, using a cane, and that's what I found most people would not want to do. Oh, my eyes are okay, I can see okay, I can still read a bit, I don't need a cane. That's fine. But on a particular section of the book I deal with is how to deal with partial sight. And I think that's very important because that's been my life. I'm still partially sighted. How do we feel about it? What are the points where we say to ourselves, this is too silly. I'm so struggling to read the books. I've got about 10 magnifying glasses. I can't read it. I can only read it slowly, et cetera, and we're starting to create for ourselves the barriers, which are so synonymous with sight loss. So we become our own worst enemy in that regard. So coming to terms, and that the tipping point we call is, it's usually called acceptance. It comes when you say to yourself, I'm not putting up with this any longer. There has to be a solution. My point in my book for you and family members is that there's so many solutions. We just need to know what they are so we can keep ourselves independent, happy and successful. Now, I'm just going to check the time because I'm not sure how we're going here. It's 2:30 and I said I'd speak for about 30 minutes and we can have questions, but I just want to reinforce to you that a lot of, I said I'd touch on doctors. A lot of people have the experience of going to doctors and they're told they've got an incurable disease, macular, diabetes, that can be treated, as you know, with wet macula and diabetes can be treated. But if you've lost your sight and you've lost the cells in your retina, nothing at the moment can restore them except that we're at the tipping point. We're at the edge of having really new developments. Yeah, I've just been given a nod. I can talk a little bit longer, but I'll try to sort of finish it up a bit. There's now things called gene therapy and stem cells, or gene therapy more particularly, because it's starting now to get out of the research phase and becoming available as treatment. Not available for every type of vision loss, but it's happening. So you see, solutions are coming, but when we go to doctors and they can't offer a solution to us, you're often told, and it certainly happened to me, look, I'm sorry, I can't help. Sometimes they don't even say sorry. I just say, I can't help you, and you're let to go out of their rooms with nothing. Now that's appalling, but I think a lot of doctors don't know what to do next, and they don't send you on to rehabilitation, which is what's needed to learn computers or learn how to manage your life. And so we're often left up in the air. Now that happened many, many times. It happened to myself. Many clients coming to peer groups complained about that, and they were left high and dry. The point I started with, they don't know where to go, don't know what to say or how to ask for help or how to explain vision loss. Again, to come back to my book, all these points are contained in this reference book I've written for that very purpose. If doctors can't help, there's nowhere to go to. There's no central point to go to. Now, my book, we mentioned again, but it's available now on the web. It's available as a book to download or an ebook. An ebook can be read if you've got a Kindle that talks. You can get Kindles that talk. It'll read it to you, or you download it onto an iPhone, and presumably, because I don't use it, onto Android phones, the speaking apparatus within the phone will read ordinary text, and it doesn't have to be an audio book. So you can access it. You don't have to be on top of every technology, but the book is currently being read, or I hope it's currently being read by Vision Australia as an audio book. But for the moment, it's available as a written book and as an ebook, which you can access. And the quickest way is through my website, which is www. I should have a full stop, www.icanseclearlybooks.com. Now that will explain the book a bit further. It gives you some quick references to the websites where you can find the book and so on. So it's quite readily available. I recommend going through the website because it saves searching through one of the Amazon sites or Booktopia, or it's available in the Apple bookstore as well, but only in Apple as an ebook. So that's it. That's what's there. That's what I'm talking about. This broad brush of information, how we respond to vision loss, how others respond to vision loss, and really that we can do almost anything. Like I refer to the people who are totally blind and do things which we can't believe they do it. But if you want to, you can do almost anything, and you're going to do it differently to the way you did it before. That's the message, and not to be afraid of that. And that's all discussed and so on in detail. So there we go. You might want some questions. I can explain more if in response to a question, Hamby, if you want to pick up a few, do you?
Absolutely. We've got a few questions, so I think we'll go through those. Give me 1 second. So thank you so much for that, Cameron. That was a very important perspective of vision loss, and I'm sure we all took a lot from it. So just a reminder that if you have any questions about anything Cameron went through, please click on the question and answer icon and type your question into the white box, which is here, and then click on send down below here. As I mentioned before, other attendees will not be able to see your questions, and only myself and Cameron. And please try to keep the questions general in nature. Before I move on to the questions, I would like to talk about the Macular Disease Foundation Australia and what we do. We operate on a number of pillars of work, and the first of which is prevention and early detection. We provide accurate, current, and ongoing information to try increase the awareness of macular disease nationwide. Just last year, we reached almost 7,000 people through our education sessions. Support and services. We provide support for all of our patients and also facilitate access to other support services. And I will talk more about this later on. We are the voice of the macular disease community. It is our privilege to advocate for the best interests of the macular community, whether it be designing policies for state and federal governments or making sure medical benefits are not cut like the IVI injections. Research and data, 100% of funds donated for research go straight into our research grants program. And since 2011, we have given a massive $4.1 million to 21 different research projects. Now, this is how we can help you. You can reach us on our toll-free helpline for any queries that you may have, not just about today's topic and presentation, but also about age-related macular degeneration and diabetic eye disease. We can also help you with questions you might have about navigating My Aged Care or Medicare. If you have someone who does not speak English as a first language, we can provide translated information too. If you are sick of hearing my voice, which I'm sure most of you are, you can also find all of our resources on our website. We also offer peer support programs where you can discuss your experiences of living with macular disease with peers who may have gone through a similar lived experience in a safe and in a welcoming space. We also offer peer-to-peer, which is a great way to connect with someone who may have a similar experience of macular disease. These calls typically occur monthly, and they typically check in to see how you're going living with macular disease. So if you are interested in either our peer support group or our peer-to-peer phone service, do give us a call on 1-800-111-709, and we'll get you in touch. At the conclusion of this seminar, we will be sending an email to all attendees. It should arrive in your inbox within an hour or so after the end of this presentation. It will contain a link for feedback. It would be great if everyone could fill out the survey. That would be fantastic. It would definitely help us improve the sessions or any future webinars we may have. A recording of this webinar will also be available on the website in a few days, and the link to this will be included in the email, as well as a link to all future webinars where you can register for them. Now, we've got a few questions, so let me bring them up. We do have a lot of questions, so I may go through just some of the most common ones that were asked. And the first question we have is, thank you for coming on, Cameron. Listening to you speak is so inspiring. What advice would you give to people to build and maintain a healthy frame of mind?
That's a good question. And of course, our minds are so complex. And again, like a lot of things, there's no simple button or switch you can flick. But if you can understand that in losing your vision and disability that arises from it is not fatal, it's not, and a lot of people said when they came to the groups, you know, I'd rather be dead than be blind. And we often make the assumption that because you've got some vision loss, you're blind. There's often a great jump. You know, remember, only 3% of the people who've got vision disability are totally blind, what they call black blind. So we're a whole world of people with varying degrees of vision impairment. So the first thing is to sort of understand, if you can still see, well, I'm not too badly off. Compare yourself to that you know, it could be worse. But if you're totally blind, then to focus more and get training on how to use all the technology and so on that's available. And I didn't come back to technology in detail, but there's some fantastic stuff available for you, and we can expand on that in a minute. But how to maintain health in that fundamental point of saying, look, I am now who I am. It's happened, all sorts of reasons. I can't at the moment because there's no actual cures for it. I've got to live with it. Then you can, that's the first state of mind you need to start to say to yourself, I can improve my situation. Now, I think if you're fearful and stressed and lots of anxiety, again, referring to a book, there's a whole process you can follow to reduce anxiety and deal with fear. Again, it's understanding our basic humanity and that, you know, we're all got these flaws and we're all different. Your reaction to the situation may be different to your neighbours, different to mine, but knowing that I think that there's some, that you can do things about it is the best state of mind you can have. Frustration comes from using technology, but the main thing is to slow down. I like it that I talked before about perceptions, what you feel about yourself, perceive about yourself, what others you think others are perceiving about you. Shed that off and start to say, look, I've got to ask people to help me. Well, I'll ask them. And I'm not going to worry too much if I feel bad about it. You say to yourself, if somebody came and asked me for help, you'd be willing to give it. Now, that's how most people feel. If they're too busy, they'll tell you. If they're not very nice people, they won't be very nice, but that's their fault, not yours. So it's, again, a perception, approaching that perception. Now, again, health-wise, it's making sure, if you start to understand what's happening, another little example, when all the stress that comes into your brain, with all the extra things you've got to memorize, often we're very tired. And here's another little bit of information that I found very helpful. Our brain is only 2% of our body weight as a generalization. That's not much. But it takes 20% of our energy in a normal, just everyday operation. Now, you lose the vision and you've got to use your thinking in your brain so much and memorize things, and you're wondering, you know, you've got to think all the time. This happens to me, and I'm sure it will be happening to you. Oh, where did I put that? And you might put something down to say, I'll remind myself later, and then you can't see it. So you're frustrated by it. These are all building up the tensions and energy levels in your brain. You can be becoming very tired. So learning to relax is a very, very important step. Now, that will vary as to how you do that on your lifestyle and your age. Getting to read audiobooks. If you just can't read, turn to audiobooks. They're fantastic. And they're free, available through the Vision Australia Library. It's free to enroll and free to get them. If you haven't got them, get them, and you can download them onto iPhones or the other styles of phone. It's an app that's free. But again, you need training. So you've got to say to yourself, I'm going to do something. I'm going to need training. How can I approach it? In that sense of feeling good about yourself and feeling healthy, that's the way to start thinking. And then you can, of course, diet is important, and that's addressed in the book, eating healthy foods. And you can cook for yourself. Don't think because you're blind or nearly blind, you can't cook. Again, you might need training with an occupational therapist comes in and gives you some backup skills, marking things, using your touch. I didn't touch on that, but touch is the greatest thing to use once you can't see. And so using tactile markers, which are little dots or buttons or bits of tape you can mark things with, you'll adjust to that. Recognise within yourself, it takes time and you can do it. And think of the people who are totally blind being doctors and climbing Mount Everest and say, oh, they can do it, I can do it. You want to go to the next question?
Certainly. What do you think is the most useful thing that family members of people with low vision can do to assist them?
Back off. Instead of rushing in and making an assumption, there's so many variations to this. Often they might come in and say to you, oh, look, you got all this dust, or your cupboards are dirty, or your kitchen bench is dirty. And I'll just sort of tell you, well, if you're strong within yourself, you'll get a cloth out of your drawer and you'll say to your relative or friend, well, there's a cloth, here you are, clean it up, please, in a nice, friendly sort of way. The families, as I said before, can react from differing levels. I think if you can say to yourself, look, I can do this. See, this is the thing my book tells you, you can do it. And if you want to do it, now you don't have to go on cooking if you don't want to, or you don't have to do certain, you can get in help. But if you want to do it, you can say to people, look, I want to do this and I will do it. I'll have to do it differently. I'll take longer. That's the best thing you can say to people, let me do it. And stop people rushing in to do it for you. And if you, in the course of it, you need help, you say to them, no, look, give us a hand here, please. Can you serve up my dinner? I do that. I mean, I'll cook it. But when all kids come over or friends come over, I'll get somebody who's got good sight or better sight to serve it up. Use the people around you to your advantage, not let, and the assumption that sighted people have is that you're helpless and hopeless. You dispel that as quickly as possible by demonstrating that you can do it. An example I give in the book was a grandparent whose daughter wouldn't let her grandchildren stay with her because she thought Gran couldn't look after them. She couldn't see them. The way the Gran got around it was to get the daughter to bring the child over for an hour, for 2 hours, a bit longer, half a day, or then a whole day, and eventually overnight. And the daughter started to realise that the grandmother was perfectly capable of coping. So we're demonstrating that you can do it to your family will give them the confidence that you're all right. You're not helpless and hopeless. Finally, a thing like, which I haven't mentioned, Google Home apparatus. There's several, brought out one by Amazon. Keep forgetting its name, it doesn't matter, but I use Google Home. It's a device, got to have Wi-Fi to use it. If you want to cook, you say to Google Home, give me a recipe for whatever. It'll give you a recipe. You're not having to look up a book for recipes. So you can be very independent. If you want to know all sorts of things through your phone, you can get a Google app on your phone or the Google device I mentioned, the Google Home device. You can be finding out information that you need to keep yourself independent. You can shop, you can Google, you can search, you can find phone numbers, etc. You can be quite capable. There we go, I think.
I've still got a few more questions.
Just stop the voice.
Oops. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Yeah, that's all right.
We're having a slight IT issue here.
It's all right. It's normal.
Shall I move on to the next question, Cameron, or did you want to continue answering that question?
Sorry.
Shall I continue on to the next question, or did
Yes,
you want
please.
to?
I think that if that answers, I hope that answers the question. I haven't been a little bit too obtuse in the answering in giving generalities, but there's something specific you need to know how to do it. We could address it, but let's pass that on to the next question.
Yeah. Thinking about your time leading peer support groups, what do you think is the benefit of being involved in a group like that?
The chance to talk openly with others who are in a similar position. They may not have the same eye disease or eye problem or eye condition, but you can talk to them about it, how you feel. I think of all the things, it gives you permission to talk open about yourself, which in a way which you wouldn't and probably couldn't do with your family, or your spouse or partner, whatever it might be. Great opportunity. Again, provided it's facilitated, the facilitation is fairly important. In other words, it can't be dominated by people who talk too much. A good facilitator will keep that under control, but allow you to say how you feel. And you'll find it when others, if you came to the group and said, oh, I'm so frustrated by this, you'll suddenly find that either people are agreeing with you or they've got some solutions which allow you to think about it. Remember, you don't have to do things the way others do it. You're your own self, but to realise you can do it differently and find your way of doing it is what you need to know. That's what groups will do for you. Give you lots of answers, allow you the freedom to talk. And that's what I found most people said. And they actually said, sometimes I had to talk people into it. I really encourage it. Come on, come in, just give it one try, come to the first meeting. And they'd stay. At the end of it said, oh, it's been life-changing. Well, I thought, well, I didn't do much. I just got them talking. You see, so that's the great advantage of a peer group, talking to you like peers. Okay, next question, Ambi.
Next question. Where is the best place to get aids for sight? And what do you think are the best things to support you when you live alone?
Very good question. And again, it's a chapter in the book which specifically covers the best technology that's around. I do find that when a lot of people came to Vision Australia's got a shop, so has Guide Dogs. Does the foundation have a shop, Ambi? Do they have to?
No.
I don't know. Okay. Well, those two organisations should have devices. The problem you've got is that people will show you devices and say, oh, what about this? And put the pressure on you to try it. And you'll have to sort of make a decision. Oh, it could be right. And you've got to take it home and try it. And you're not sure how to work it. If the equipment's got a bit of complexity to it, you're entitled to seek training on it and ask the organisation that's selling it to give you that training. And that would apply to more advanced technology. But the technology, you can get sold a lot of rubbish. And there's another little failing you can have is that you want to get everything because it looks good and all these things with rubber bottoms on them that don't slip and little devices and gadgets. In essence, you can get talked into buying too much. I think you've got to ask yourself what you need, what are you trying to do, and then focus on that. Because this, like you can get large print games, sewing if you want to be needlework and knitting. Remember, totally blind people are doing crochet, so don't think you can, knitting, it's just the technique of doing it. You can get training to do that, and there's special needles and special ways and so on. Special equipment that you might want to use for cooking, protect yourself, etc. There, again, asking the question, what do you want to do? If you want to write and you want to read, well, there's the audio books, it's the technology I've mentioned on the iPhones and the Androids. There are apps that are free. One app that I use is called Seeing AI. I think it's called SuperSense for Androids. It's free. And you download that. If you can't download it, get your children or your family to download it for you. And that's the other thing, anything to do with technology in the beginning, get people to help you. Don't try and get frustrated. It's the worst thing you can do. Get them to download it. And if I say to my phone, hey Siri, turn on Seeing AI, and that's AI in the end of its initials for artificial intelligence. You'll see that a lot nowadays. It'll turn it on. I hold my phone over a bit of paper and it'll read it. That's fantastic. In one of my groups, a lady who's really stressed by losing her sight suddenly, I told her about this app. She had an iPhone. She got somebody to download it. I rang her a week later and she was so happy. She said, I've been going all around the home reading things. And I thought, isn't that wonderful? So the apps, there's several apps that read. Some are free and some cost money. There's other apps that you can have which are free. One I use all the time is a cash reader. You've got to pay for that a little bit, but it'll read all banknotes and you can sort your banknotes out. We didn't discuss shopping at all, but it's a big picture. So when the steps for looking for what you need, think about what you want first. Is it a task or is it a general thing about being independent? And then focus on that with the organisation you go to. Just walking into a shop and saying, what have you got? It's pretty hopeless. You need to be asking, what have you got for this? What have you got for that? And again, ask for training because you'll probably need it. Is that answered it, I think, without being more specific? We can come back to it if you want to, Andy. Next question.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. So, is there a list of suggested activities after vision loss? Most of my activities require sight. Thank you.
Sorry, my jaws just spoke. I've got an earphone in. You probably see it, as you can see it. What was that question again? Is there a
list of suggested activities after vision loss?
Some are mentioned in my book. Yes, there are. There's all sorts of organisations around to do it. Within those mainstream support groups, like I mentioned Guide Dogs Vision Australia and their foundation, like you've got all those support groups within your foundation there, which you've mentioned, but you need to know them and how to access them. But look, you can be going to the movies, you can be going to concerts, you can, as I said, you can be reading, you can join sporting groups if you want, you're interested in sport, or you can get a walking partner if you want to walk. If depending on how old you are as to whether you go through in the NDIS, which I call the National Dog Improvement Service for people getting guide dogs through, the NDIS or My Aged Care, you can get support through that, shopping or walking or cleaning. So those things are there. Again, nobody tells you how to get onto them. Again, it's in the book, but again, contacting a service organisation will also lead you to those things of what to do. It's almost unlimited. Bushwalking, canoeing, fishing, you name it, you can do it. And there's a whole range of organisations that can help you do it. One thing which you're probably all aware of, you know, what are the things you need? A pension. If you've lost the sight to a certain degree, there's a test for that. The companion card, which you all should have, that's national, although you get it through your state government. You can go take somebody with you when you're travelling and go to a theatre. So again, you can get out and about if that's what you want to do. If you don't want to do that, you can sit at home and read or write, well, you can use the technology, which I've touched on. Next question, Hamby. I think that's covering it.
We'll go for the lucky last one. So hi, Cameron. That was fantastic. I know RP and other eye conditions can affect night vision. Are there any tips or tricks you have picked up over time to help navigate during low light conditions at night?
The simple ones, use the cane. It's hard if you don't like it. The cane's the best guide. It's like extending your finger down to the ground and you can feel your way around, even within your home. But little tips in your home, walking around, you know, make sure you've got lights. They're not coming on, sensor lights they're called. Sorry, the George has come on, just distracted me. Put your hand out against, or don't put your fingers and touch the wall, turn your hand in, and so using the back side of your hand to touch the wall as a feeler is a good thing. touch, relying on touch within your kitchen, within your home. Make sure you've got things marked so you can identify them, depending what it is. If it's contents for cooking and things like that, some of them you can smell, some of them you need to get marked. And there's several devices you can use for marking them. But just getting around in dim light, if there's nobody there to help you, a cane is really good, even within your home. And I know it's a hateful thing, the cane. I took years to use it. And it was only when my son bought me one, he saw me being an idiot, crashing into walls or doors. He said, "Here, Dad, use the cane." And out of obligation to him, I started using it. But honestly, when you use it outside, people will help you. Not everyone, but people will come and offer help. And that's fantastic. I owe so much to strangers to come in to help. And accept that, saying, look, I am who I am now. I've got to go slowly. Go slowly is another tip. Don't rush. Don't try to be like you were, rushing around the house like a mad thing, and modify everything to suit yourself. I think that covers the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Handy, properly.
Yeah. I thank you so much, Cameron, for answering all the questions. And thank you to everyone for sending through all of your questions. If you did have any further questions, feel free to email the Macular Disease Foundation Australia or give us a call, and we'll try to get a response or an answer for you as soon as possible.
And again, Abby, you put in the thing of that website for me, will you? Because people may not have been able to record it or write it down. I'll email it to you. And
absolutely.
And just look it up, or get their family to look up the book and give the book. If you can't read it, give it to your family. Tell them to read. Say, look, this is very helpful. Could you read it? It might help you more than it help me.
Speaking of the book, Cameron, where could we purchase a book from again?
Yeah, well, again, it's available on Amazon and Booktopia and the ebooks in Apple Books. But the quickest links to those are through my website. And the ISBN numbers are on the website and everything. So you could search for my name on Amazon, brings it up, or the name of the book. There's about 6 books entitled I Can See Clearly. So you've got to keep looking. But my website, www.icanseeclearlybooks.com, will direct you quick as anything to where you can access the book. And I did mention it'll eventually be an audio book through Vision Australia, but I'm still waiting.
Thank you so much for that, Cameron. Much appreciated. Just a reminder about our next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks' time. Support and services available for the blind and vision impaired. And they'll be in 2 weeks' time at the same time. So we hope to see you then. I think we've come to the conclusion of today's webinar. Thank you all. Thank you to Cameron for presenting today.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure.
I'm sure we've all taken a lot from it. And thank you to everyone here for joining today's webinar. We hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time. Till then, have a great day.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much, Cameron.